Yay.
Yeah, there it is.
Have you been to one of the runes classes yet?
I have.
Oh, good. Awesome. Wonderful. Where?
Yeah, baby. Yeah, Baby Shark. You're watching Baby Shark.
No.
Do you want your other Baby Shark?
Yeah.
Okay, give me just a second.
So, welcome to runes class. To start off the class, as I've said before in other classes, the book that we use for divination practices when it comes to runes, or the book that we use for this class, is this one, and it is called The Runes Workbook by Leon D. Wild. If you are looking to learn extensively about Norse mythology and about kind of more in depth into Norse spirituality and Norse practices, this is not the book that I would suggest. There are plenty of others on the website that are listed in the rune section that focus more on the mythology, the history, the anthropology, and that dive deeper into a lot of that. This book, though, if you are looking to use runes for divination work and you are looking to learn about the Elder Futhark alphabet that is used for divination practices, then this book is amazing. And it is the one that I reference the most in this class. I also reference other books as well that focus heavier on the anthropology, the history, and the mythology. Yes, so with that, we are going to get started. And I actually was going to start this class with kind of a cool video that I found. I found this really awesome dude on YouTube who, if I can get to my YouTube channel, who has a PhD in the study of Norse. I forgot what he has a PhD in. I think it's the study of Norse spirituality. He's gonna say it.
I think you had us watch it last time too, and it was really, really fun.
Good. Okay. Awesome. I found his actual channel. I think before I had just found one of his videos, and now I found like his actual channel where all of his videos are at, and I love him. He is fantastic. He's also from Colorado. He teaches at the University of oh my God, UC Boulder, the University of Colorado Boulder. Yeah.
Okay.
And he's also taught at Berkeley, and he's taught all over the place. And it's really cute because, I don't know, I'm from Denver, so I forget that a lot of people in Colorado are very like, I don't know, he wears like a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and stuff. And I forgot that that's a very common Colorado attire because
yes.
Being from Denver, it's not exactly what I'm used to. Where is it? I need playlists. Here we go. Playlists and Norse mythology.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford.
Oh my God, that is such a Southern accent. There's no way he's originally from Colorado.
Right? I know. He says he's originally from Colorado, but I thought the exact same thing. I was like, you, the way that you speak is slightly Southern. Introduction to mythology. We want the one that's only 10 minutes long. Okay. It's actually 15 minutes long. That's fine. Okay. So let me find the video, make sure that I have it.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford.
Yes, you are. Okay.
Why, yes, you are.
yes, you are. So, by the way, EJ, are you with us? I'm just making sure.
Yeah, just a background noise for the kiddo.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Sounds good. I just wanted to make sure. They didn't start.
Yeah, I apologize
For
that I
sure.
am not looking directly at the screen. I'm actually in the middle of taking my pharmacy technician exam right now, so my attention is split.
Okay. Good luck.
Yeah, I'm entering in fake prescriptions right now. So
Nice.
I'm so glad I'm off my ADHD meds, because otherwise I would never be able to split my attention this effectively.
That's awesome. Well, good luck. So one thing that I really like to address about runes is a lot of, I don't know, now that I have become the owner of an academy that focuses on paganism, I have looked at so much of the information that exists out there on social media, on YouTube, on everywhere across the internet. And it's really disappointing when it comes to runes work, because a lot of it is just, let me give you the definition of the Fehu rune and the Uruz rune, and like that's it. And then you just, pull 3 runes and read. And that's very disappointing, because there's so much more to actually being a runes practitioner. And in my opinion, it begins in understanding and learning the culture and the mythology. And not only the mythology, but the spirituality. And I call, just for reference, I call all religions mythology. So the mythology of the Bible, and the mythology of the Torah and the Quran, and the mythology of a pagan spirituality.
Oh, my mom hates it when I tell people, yeah, my daughter's name is from Jewish mythology.
And and that doesn't mean that any of it is untrue at all. It just means that the definition of mythology focuses on stories and focuses on depictions of sometimes true, and sometimes it focuses on things that actually happened, and sometimes it focuses on ideology, and sometimes it focuses on interpretations of real things that happened and interpretations of stories and all of these things. And so religion in itself and spirituality in itself is in large a lot of mythology. And but that doesn't mean that it is false or untrue. It is just stories that were being told based on ideologies and sometimes based on real events. Anyway, a huge important part of learning runes is understanding the spirituality, understanding the culture, and understanding the mythology. And that begins, in my opinion, the easiest way to start is learning about the gods and goddesses that were celebrated, that were worshipped, that were believed in, and that stories were told about. And so that is the very first thing that we are going to do. And I think that in a lot of the other classes that I've done about this too, I've shown another dude in another video who goes over the family tree. And that's very important too. We are also going to go over the family tree, but this guy had some really cool insight, especially being a professor, and I really enjoyed his videos. So let me share screens. Oh, first I have to, sometimes me and technology. Okay, share screens. There we go. Share. Okay. Make larger. Cool. And
I'm an Old Norse specialist teaching at the University of Colorado Boulder, previously at UC Berkeley and UCLA. Today, what I want to talk about is who the Norse gods and goddesses are, as best as we can tell from the actual Old Norse sources. I'm not talking about 19th, 20th, 21st century books or websites, but rather going back to the original sources of these stories, and then drawing from that what we can know about the gods and goddesses. So to begin with, let me remind you real quick that the spellings of names that I show on the screen here are the Old Norse spellings, not the modern Icelandic spellings. And the pronunciation of names that I use is the Old Norse pronunciation as reconstructed by linguists such as myself. The language is actually very well known to us, the pronunciation reasonably well assured, by several different veins of reconstruction by historical linguists, and so I don't think there's any harm in using the reconstructed pronunciation rather than the modern Icelandic pronunciation that's become so popular in the last couple of decades by people who teach Old Norse. So there are two families of the gods that these texts tell us about. There's the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir seem to be somewhat more dominant, while the Vanir seem to be more subordinate. And the Vanir also seem to have some more association with fertility and agriculture in the natural world. Njordr is the most senior of the Vanir. He's often called the god of the sea, but we have to be careful about those labels in Norse mythology. Often the gods are more personalities than they are simply functions. And the functions that we assign to them today based on a story or two or a hint or two often oversimplify their role and are really usable and should be used only as sort of mnemonics for us to remember who these gods are. Njordr slept with an unnamed sister to produce his son and daughter, Freyr and Froya. Freyr, often called the god of agriculture and fertility, and Froya, often called the goddess of love. And their names literally mean Lord and Lady. Freyr and Froya, they're related to the German word Frau, meaning lady originally, now more or less just woman. But so these are probably not originally their names, rather titles for them. Possibly Froyer's original name was Yngvi, he's sometimes called that. And Froya may perhaps be the same person as Frigg, the wife of Odin. Frigg means love, in spite of what it might sound like to English speakers. And Froya is said now and then to be married to Othar, which is simply another form of the name Odin. And very unlikely to be a different person, given how much Odin disguises himself and changes his name. Njordr is married to Skadi. Skadi was originally a giant, as was Froyr's wife, Gerður. But once they have married into the gods, these giant women become considered goddesses. So we have to remember that the giants are not a different species from the gods. They're simply a family, often a rival family, but sometimes a family that interbreeds with the gods as well. And so much like a woman might assume a new last name when she marries a man, the giant women assume the title of goddess, whether Vanir or Aesir, if they happen to marry one of the gods, and they are no longer considered giant women. So they're not a separate species, they're not giant blue people. Another god sometimes considered one of the Vanir, at least according to the poem Þrymskvida in the Poetic Edda, is Heimdallr, who is the guardian of the gods. We know that Heimdallr is the son of 9 sisters, but we don't know what that means. And we know that he has fantastic sight and hearing, and that he is ever watchful for Ragnarok, the final battle in which the gods will be killed. He will announce the coming of Ragnarok by blowing his great horn, Gjallarhorn. Now, among the Aesir, the chief god is Odin. Odin's name means the mad one. Same ambiguity in English as in Old Norse, the crazy one or the angry one, and either one is appropriate to him. He is a very anxious figure, which is not always suggested by the way he's depicted in popular media. Odin is anxious because he knows that he and the rest of the gods will die at Ragnarok. Specifically, Odin knows he will be swallowed by the great wolf Fenrir. And so, in order to try to forestall the events of Ragnarok, he's trying to build up the greatest army that he can. And he does this by sending his Valkyries. And these are also not a separate species, but rather human or giant women who are granted the powers of a Valkyrie, down to battlefields to take warriors who die in battle to Odin in his hall in Valhall. Now notice both these words, Valkyrie, which in Old Norse is Valkyria, and Valhall have that first element, Val. Now, Val means a dead body on the battlefield. In English, it's often translated slain, which is a good translation for it. So the Valkyria is the chooser of the slain, and Valhall is the hall of the slain. Now, in Valhall, these dead warriors will fight and kill one another all day, every day, being resurrected in the evening to have a feast together. And what they're doing is training up for Ragnarok. And so Odin will also often wander the earth in disguise in order to stir up battle and get men to kill one another. And Odin, in his normal appearance, is an old man with one eye. He is fond of wide-brimmed hats and the color gray and spears or staffs. And he disguises himself as an old man, dressed usually in gray, often in a wide-brimmed hat, with a staff or spear, and one eye. And yet somehow no one ever knows it's him. And he'll always give a name that's a little bit suggestive of his role or his appearance. So he'll call himself Bolverker, evildoer, or Horrorbarder, gray hair, gray beard. Well, in the story in which he takes the name Bolverker, which is told by Snorri in his prose edda, Odin, or Bolverker, wanders past a field where 9 men are mowing with scythes. Odin approaches these 9 men and offers to sharpen their scythes with his whetstone. And after he's done so, the men ask if they can buy this excellent whetstone. And he says, sure. Essentially, whoever is still alive when it comes down to the ground can have it. He throws it up in the air. The 9 men kill one another. He catches his stone and he walks along his merry way on his way to go get the meat of poetry, according to the story that Snorri retells. So Odin is happy. He's got 9 more men who have killed each other fighting, and they're going to join his army in Valhall. So he's a very ambiguous figure in a way, because even though he is leading the side of good against the giants and monsters at Ragnarok, he is at the same time not necessarily going to help you lead a long and happy life. If he can get his way, he's going to harvest you when you are still at your top fighting prowess. Odin is married to Frigg, and Odin and Frigg have a famous son, Baldur, who is mostly famous for being beautiful and for being killed when his blind brother, Hother, is tricked into killing him by the trickster figure, Loki. Hother may not be Frigg's son. His mother hasn't specified, but he probably is based on his relationship with Baldur and that story. Odin has most of his children with women other than Frigg. His most famous son is with Jord, literally earth, and that is his son Thor. Thor is quite different from Odin. Thor is he's a fighter, but he's not there's no hint of selfishness in his fighting. He is a defender both of Osgarður, the gods' enclosure where they live, and of Midgarður, the middle enclosure where we humans live. And to protect us, he uses his hammer Mjolnir, which has the power not only to break anything that it touches, but Thor can also throw it any distance and have it return to him. And it can even shrink down to the size of a small amulet so that he can disguise himself as just a regular metalhead. Thor has a wife named Siv, and with both Siv and various giant women who he is otherwise quite busy killing, he has children, including his daughter Thrúður, strength, his son Magni, strength, and his son Modi, basically wrath. Another important member of the Aesir family is Tyr. Tyr is the one-handed god, just as Odin is the one-eyed god. Tyr lost his hand when the wolf Fenrir was being bound up by the gods who knew that he was prophesied to kill Odin at Ragnarok. And Fenrir had to be tricked into putting on a chain that would actually bind him permanently. But he was suspicious, and he said that one of the gods had to put his hand in his mouth so that Fenrir could bite it off, just in case the chain actually would bind him up forever. And the only one who was honest enough to do that was Tyr, so he lost his hand. Unfortunately, we don't know much more about Tyr beyond that story. Other than that, his father, Hymir, is a giant, again reminding us that the giants and gods are different families, sometimes rivals, sometimes tense friends, rather than different species. Now, one of the most interesting figures who's at the intersection of giant and god is Loki. Loki is often called the trickster. I'm not sure that that term actually very well captures exactly how he behaves in most of his poems. At any rate, Loki is the son of a figure named Thorbati and a woman, Laufey. Snorri says Thorbati is a giant and Laufey is a goddess. Keep in mind, Laufey is not his dad, but his mom. That is something that is often misrepresented in popular culture, probably because Loki is often called Laufey, or son of Laufey, but more often men are called son of their father than their mother. Loki is married to Sigyn, but his most famous children are with the giant woman Angrboda. His children with her include Fenrir, the wolf that bit off Tyr's hand and will eventually kill Odin, the serpent or dragon that encircles Midgardr, where human beings live. This dragon is either called Midgardsormr, literally Midgard's serpent, or sometimes Jormungandr, monstrous being, monstrous beast. Neither one is a name, but more of a description of it. And then there is Hel, the half living and half blue as a corpse woman who rules over Hel, the realm of the dead, who don't go to Valhalla. Loki also can literally become female rather than simply pure female. He can become even another species female. He becomes a mare at one point and is impregnated by the horse Svadilfuri and gives birth to the stallion Sleipnir, which is the 8-legged stallion of Odin. Now, the giants, to talk about them a little bit more. Again, they're not a different species. They're not giant blue things. In fact, giant isn't even a very good translation for what they're called in Old Norse, which is either Jotun or Thors. Jotun seems to be the more neutral word. Thors seems to be a word that implies more evil, more destruction. And very rarely in Old Norse, but more in modern folklore, you'll see the word troll. When that's used in Old Norse, it seems to imply a particularly ugly giant, but then some of the giants are said to be very beautiful. Among the giants, there seems to be perhaps a distinct kind called the Hrimthors. This is frost giant. It's possible this isn't actually intended to be a different kind, but this is just a word that's used when we need alliteration with an H, as Old Norse poetry is strongly alliterative, and there are many alternative names for many different creatures. But the Hrimthors are, if they are a distinct class of giants, are the earliest living beings in Norse myth, because among their number is the very first living thing, Ymir. Odin's mother is a giant, Besla. She is the daughter of Bolthorn, another giant, and she is married to Bor, who is one of the descendants of the earliest, well, one of the other earliest living beings, the earliest one in the Aesir line, Bori, who is licked out of a block of ice by Audhumla, the first cow. Now, if you read Snorri or read certain handbooks, websites about Norse myth, you'll also find the names of many other gods and goddesses. For example, reading Snorri, you might encounter goddess names like Sjolven, which he says is a goddess of love, Loven, which he says is another goddess of love, or Hlin, which he says is a goddess of protection. It is unlikely these actually were separate goddesses that were believed in Old Norse times. They are probably alternative names for Frigg and Froya used in poetry when that particular name would fit the needs of the alliteration or rhyme in a given poem. There is no independent evidence for these goddesses aside from Snorri making a list of them. And Snorri always wants to have a list of 12 goddesses or 12 gods. And since there aren't that many goddesses mentioned, he fills out the list with a lot of these alternative names for Frigg and Froya. There are some other gods and goddesses that clearly were legitimate parts of Viking Age belief that we just don't know much about. There's Ullr, who seems to have been a very powerful god early on in Norse belief, but to have lost a lot of his portfolio as the Viking Age progressed. He's a very shadowy figure, associated vaguely with oaths in some poems of the Poetic Edda. There's Gevjon, a goddess. There is Fulla, a goddess who is the servant of Frigg, and there's Vor, a goddess who protects wedding vows. But beyond that, there are not many other gods and goddesses that we can point to as definitely having been part of the mythological traditions that survive from the Viking Age. Now, our two major sources that survive from the Middle Ages are two books called Edda, written in Iceland in the 1200s. One of these is the Poetic Edda. This is a compilation of different poems, each one of which is a different topic about the Norse gods or about some of the legendary Norse heroes. The poems are not necessarily related to each other, much like the books of the Bible aren't necessarily related to each other in what they talk about. They don't necessarily tell one single narrative. that begins in one poem and ends in another. Each one has a particular focus. So, for instance, the poem Völuspá tells about the creation and destruction of the world. Hávamál tells of Odin's wisdom, as well as his sacrifice of himself to himself. Lokasenna tells of Loki insulting all of the gods at a feast. There's also the prose Edda. Now, the prose Edda is the work of one particular author, Snorri Sturluson. Snorri was born in 1178 or 1179 and died in 1241. He was an Icelandic chieftain, and the reason he wrote the prose Edda was originally to instruct the current generation of Icelanders to compose traditional Old Norse poetry rather than the increasingly popular English or French styles of poetry that were leaking into Scandinavia at the time. But in order to instruct people in writing this very complex form of poetry, which often makes allusions and references to the myths, Snorri had to retell many of those myths. And it's clear that he knew many of the poems in the Poetic Edda, sometimes in slightly different versions than the ones that actually were preserved in the manuscript of the Poetic Edda, the Codex Regius. And he often quotes poems that aren't in the Poetic Edda too, so sometimes he's our only source for certain stories. And we have to keep in mind that in spite of the fact that the writing of these books is being done in the 1200s, that doesn't mean that the stories are only as old as the 1200s. So poetry can actually survive relatively unchanged for a pretty long period of time. And there's linguistic evidence that many poems in the Poetic Edda actually date from many centuries before the 1200s when they were written down. So in spite of the somewhat popular claim on some websites that Norse mythology was basically made up in the 1200s by Christians, that's not true. Christian scholars wrote down what they knew of the Norse myths in the 1200s, and as far as we can tell, they did an honest effort at recording the stories that they did know. Keep in mind, of course, that that is just stories. They didn't transmit anything about how to worship these gods, right? We know very little about prayer or religion as far as the Norse religion went. We know their stories, their mythology. I hope that if you enjoy.
Okay, so learning, let me hang on. Okay, learning about Norse mythology and the Norse gods and goddesses, as well as all of the giants and the creatures that make up Norse mythology is a vast area of study. It could make up its own class very easily all on its own. And the fact that I have to blend that with also teaching the divination aspects of runes makes these classes very vast as well. There's a lot to cover, there's a lot to go over, there's a lot to learn. And as he stated as well, a lot of what we have is written by people who weren't necessarily part of the religion, part of the spirituality, part of the culture. I have read the Edda, and it is it's amazing, but also you can tell that a lot of the poems, a lot of the stories are not necessarily written by people who wholeheartedly believed in that spirituality. And it is one of those cultures where there's a lot of guessing going on, and there's a lot of making inferences and trying to figure out, using clues and using the information that we did have to kind of put together a story and to analyze the writings that we do have to create an idea of what we think the spirituality looked like. And there are some ancient texts and ancient writings that we do have that depict the spirituality, but not enough to really put together everything about the religion and spirituality itself, which is common in a lot of pagan spiritualities, especially ones that are ancient. And for many different reasons as well. We have, a lot of the indigenous North American and South American and Central American spiritualities you see due to genocide, due to colonialism, a lot of those spiritualities, we play a lot of guessing games as well. And so it makes it a lot easier with pagan spiritualities to create, not necessarily, I don't want to call like all the things I've seen on social media to be false, but it does make it very, very easy for anybody to just kind of come along and interpret these writings in whatever way that they want to and post whatever they want about all of these spiritualities, because there is no book or dogma or anything that encompasses all of it and that is still around, that we are still able to read. And so it leaves a lot to be interpreted, which can be awesome when you are kind of enjoying the cultural anthropology and learning and trying to make your own interpretations of all of these spiritualities. And it makes it kind of fun to explore and to investigate, but it also means that a lot of it is culturally appropriated and a lot of it is misinformation. And yeah, so I really like that guy's videos. I really love how he's dedicated his life to figuring out a lot of he's kind of dedicated his life to interpreting a lot of Norse mythology, and I really enjoy his videos, so go check out his YouTube channel as part of this class. I think that that would make for awesome homework, because he also depicts it too in a way that's very scholarly, which I appreciate, rather than basing it on some of the videos that base it more on magical teachings, which I love. Obviously, I am a magical teacher, but I really do appreciate dedicating more scholarly information to your YouTube channel and to really making it, this is what we have discovered as paleontologists, as anthropologists, as linguistics, and, you know, really actually figuring out the scholarly information that exists about these cultures, rather than making it about magical inferences. So, does anybody have any comments to make about the Norse gods and the stuff that we learned in that video?
I was just going to add, as far as Jackson Crawford is concerned, you should definitely check out the many books that he has written himself or co-authored. They're significant pieces of information.
Yeah, I really like him. I discovered him recently, and I've watched almost every video on his YouTube channel. I love everything that he has to say, and I love the way that he presents the information. So that's awesome. I will. I didn't know that he wrote books, so that's awesome. I will go read those.
Sorry. I appreciated the emphasis that he put on Loki's parentage, because it is something that's really often misrepresented.
Definitely. I think that there's so much, especially recently, that is misinterpreted and a lot of misinformation, because for some reason people seem to like to get their information about Norse mythology from Marvel. Which, when did we start getting our actual information from superhero comics and from superhero movies? Obviously the depiction of Loki and Odin and Thor in Marvel movies. I mean, okay, I love Marvel very much. Does that mean that I think that it is scholarly information? No. It is a fictional movie based on fictional characters that Marvel decided to use real mythological characters that stem from real mythology, but that does not mean that they depicted them in a way that is correct. And so I always find it kind of funny when I see depictions of Thor that are very Marvel. Yes, so now we are going to get into some other stuff. We have a lot more to learn about the gods and goddesses and the mythology surrounding that, but we are going to kind of jump around and dive into, oh, I should probably share screens and show you guys how I did that, actually. So for people who have not yet extensively explored the website,
I spent way too much time exploring the website.
I'm so glad, because I add new things every day, especially when I have an entire day where I spend the entire day studying all of this stuff, and I post it all here. So there's so much information on this website. And also I want to make it known that every single page on here is a work in progress. Obviously, like we are about to look at the rune section on this website, I am not finished at all, even close. None of these sections are done. I am just filling in everything as I go. I also, it's not filled with everything that I know. It's not filled with everything I've read. It is me slowly, while also having a full-time job and going to school, slowly trying to put together a website with enough information for people to actually be able to study and learn about these things.
And we appreciate everything you do. I don't know if you get told enough how much we appreciate everything you do.
You are so sweet. Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you. So the very first thing that we are going to go over for the divination part of reading the Elder Futhark alphabet and runes is talking about the way, so using it for divination purposes is not necessarily an ancient practice. We don't necessarily know. There are records that show that it could have possibly been used for games that, like, I'm talking about like the runes alphabet being placed onto stones and being used as a form of symbolism for divination work. And that's not necessarily an ancient practice. It is, in some cases and in some forms, a more modern practice. And when I say modern, it's definitely been used for a couple hundred years, but that is definitely much shorter of an amount of time than runes have actually been around, as like the rune alphabet, especially Elder Futhark. But there are records that show that printed runes on stones and on wood and on pretty much stones and wood, yeah. That they have been used for things like games, things like spiritual work, things like sigil creation, and all of that for an unknown amount of time. But specifically the way that we are going to learn how to practice them as a divination is definitely a more modern type of divination work, and it is probably only a couple hundred years old. And it was created in, it was used in Scandinavia, but it definitely became more popular throughout other parts of Europe. It became more popular throughout the UK. It became more popular throughout France and Italy. And these things are not necessarily Scandinavian divination practices or Norse divination practices. It is just the use of Elder Futhark alphabet and runes used in this divination practice. And that is why you have to understand Norse mythology, Norse spirituality, to be able to truly understand how to use these for divination practices, even though using this for divination is definitely a more modern use of runes. Now, there are, like I said, accounts of them using them for sigil work and for spirituality and things like that, but we're not exactly sure how they were used. The way that I'm going to teach you today is based on once this alphabet made it throughout Europe and developed, and other cultures and other spiritualities took this alphabet on and used it for sigil work and divination work. And that is why you will see, as I am about to go over it, like we are about to go over the elements and how the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, tie into this use of divination work. The symbolism for earth, air, fire, and water, the way that I'm going to teach you now, is an Arabic spirituality, an ancient Arabic spirituality that is very pagan, but it traveled from the Middle East into Europe, and they used it for pagan divination practices throughout Europe, and they used it throughout divination practices in all over the world, in India, in East Asia, but it originated in the Middle East. The symbolism for the elements that we are about to go over originated in the Middle East. And so that's one of the ways that you can tell that it's a little bit more modern, because you can see that the numerology we're about to go over, the elements that we're about to go over, all stem from different places in India and the Middle East. And so obviously this was used as a form of divination the way that I am teaching you. Once all of those cultures started to trade and started trade routes and started speaking to each other and communicating and talking and sharing spiritualities. And so obviously it's a little bit more modern, because we are talking about once those trade routes were set up and people were able to communicate and share spiritualities. But it does predate Christianity, and obviously it predates Islam in the Middle East. So anyway, let's get into it. The elements that are used for divination work for Elder Futhark runes are earth, air, fire, and water. The symbolism originated in what we would know now as Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia. Earth is usually a symbol for stability, healing, grounding, for sentient life, for monetary and wealth growth, for everything that exists around us on the physical plane, such as humans and trees and flowers and plants and houses and anything that really exists on Earth. Every organism that exists on Earth, everything that is part of the web of connection that connects all living things on Earth, the food that sustains us, the cycle of life, of life and death, the things that ground us, the things that remind us of our mortality as well as our immortality, being that once we die and decompose into the earth, our body is sustenance for trees and plants and animals and for other organisms, and that creates a very strong idea of immortality, that though the body dies, it is also turned into something else, biodegrades and turns into flowers and plants and food for other beings. Air is usually the symbol for wisdom, communication, intellect, intellectual thought. It is the idea of being free and of being a sentient being that has this idea of free will. It is the symbol for change, for transformation. Water is also the symbol for transformation, but air has its own version of transformation. Being that when you boil water, it turns into steam and it turns into air, and it has its own cycle of transformation. It is the train of thought that passes through your mind. It is our conscious mind. It is logic, mathematics, geometry, but not necessarily what we think of now as mathematics. I mean, it is like, 1 + 1 = 2, but it's also math that exists all around us in a very theoretical sense. The fact that the entire world is made up of geometry and mathematics and logic without us being able to touch or feel or even understand that mathematics, but it exists around us and it is theoretical, and it is something that we cannot touch, something that we cannot feel, something that we can't necessarily even comprehend, but it is always there and it always exists, much like air. It is knowledge and wisdom, like I said, and it is storytelling, it is communication, it is, it's another side of, I'm going to explain how water is intimacy, but air is also another aspect of intimacy, because intimacy and things like intercourse and things like that are just a different form of language. It's just a different form of communication, and air is language and air is communication. Fire is based on action. It is the action that all beings, all things make, that all life on this planet makes. It is rebirth and destruction and passion. It is the essence of your soul, what exists inside you that is more than earth, where earth is your body and air is your ability to think and to process information and to think about theoretical ideas and to communicate, where fire is the soul that exists within you. It is impulses, it is the way that you fall passionately in love with ideas and with hobbies and with all the things that you love and desire. It is warmth, it is love. It is love in a sense of the action of love, what you do for love, what you, and not necessarily just romantic love, but your love and passion for all things in life. It is the way that you act because of that love. It is the sun, it is energy, it is the sun's rays giving life to all things. It is divination work, it is magic, it is being able to communicate with the energy all around us, because communication with energy is action, even though communication is also air, but being able to truly feel the energy all around us, that energy itself is fire. It is the most raw and pure form of magic. It is one of the very first accounts of magic in every culture all over the world. You will see this idea of fire having some sort of spiritual significance. It is the connection to our ancestors. It is the energy that can seemingly be created from nothing. This idea that when you light a candle, that teeny tiny little piece of fire on that candle can ignite millions of candles without losing any energy of its own. And that is what it kind of means to be able to seemingly create energy from nothing, because it doesn't lose any of its flame when it lights the flames of millions of candles. Water is emotions. It is the intensity of emotion. Emotion is much like an ocean, and where it can be or water in a sense, it can be an ocean, a river, a stream, but it can be delicate and gentle and flowing and life-sustaining, but it can also be destruction and huge and enormous, and it can take the lives of everything around it. It can create canyons, it can break through rock, it can be extremely destructive, but yet also it is life-sustaining and calm and beautiful, and it's what we use to sustain all life. It is transformation. Like I said, with the analogy of being able to destroy rock and make canyons, it is being able to transform anything on earth. Water can transform anything that exists on the planet. Water is a huge representation of the moon, because the moon helps to move the tides of the ocean, and the moon has a huge effect on water, and therefore the moon has become a huge symbol of water. Even before we knew that the moon could move the tides and that it had an impact on the ocean, the moon already was a huge symbol for water, which has always been very interesting to me. I don't think we give ancient humans enough credit for the knowledge that they did have, even if they didn't have, what we call science now to back it up. They still had such a great understanding of the way that the world worked and functioned. It is empathy. It is connection. It is unexplainable emotions that we don't understand why we're having them. It is emotions that give us motivation and inspiration and joy, and also that give us depression and anxiety and grief. It brings creation as well as destruction. It symbolizes the emotional relationships that we share with all people and beings and things. The connection, the emotional connection and attachment that we have to plants and to animals and to each other. It is trauma and loneliness as well as happiness and euphoria. It is all emotional relationships. It is friendship. It is romance. So those are the 4 elements that you work with when reading runes, and when using them for divination purposes. The symbolism that every single one of those elements connects with is very important, as well as how each one of those elements connects to the gods and goddesses of Norse mythology. And we are going to jump into how all of those connect to Norse mythology now. So you have your runes cloth. And now there are many, many, many different ways to read the Elder Futhark runes. I'm going to teach you a few ways. One of the ways uses a rune cloth. There are many ways to do it that don't involve a rune cloth at all, but one of the ways involves a rune cloth. One of the ways that the elements help us with their symbology to read runes is by using a runes cloth. I've watched lots of videos and read lots of books. I still suck at pronunciation. I am working on it. But you have Muspelheim, Vanheim, Niflheim, and Jotunheim on the runes cloth. And you also have north, east, south, and west. North, east, south, and west all symbolize different elements. The elements that they represent, like I said before, actually stem from Middle Eastern spirituality. And it is theorized that they had a significance in divination, in using runes for divination work, when these spiritualities came over via trade routes and via people talking and discussing and telling stories and talking to each other about the history of their ancestors and their people and their spiritualities and their religions. And you will see throughout Europe, including Scandinavia in modern time. And in modern time, I mean like for the last 400 years or so, you will see that most European spiritualities kind of adopted the same symbology that Middle Eastern spirituality used for the 4 directions and the 4 elements. And that includes Scandinavia. and modern depictions within the last 400 years of divination practices within Scandinavia. So you have Muspelheim representing fire, Vanaheim representing water, Niflheim representing earth, and Jotunheim representing air. And you can see that right here on the runes cloth. And during a runes reading, the way that you will use the runes cloth, if you choose to use it, and if you choose to do runes readings that involve a runes cloth, then the runes will be drawn as they typically are, and then shaken and thrown onto the runes cloth. Where the rune lands will aid in the definition of what that rune is telling you about your life, about your ancestors, about your lots of things. It'll tell you about a lot of things. And so wherever they fall in the runes cloth is going to help you with deciphering what they are trying to tell you. And like I just described to you, what each element means and signifies is going to add to the description, definition, and interpretation of the rune that you have thrown onto the cloth. So if you throw, let's say that you were here. Let me give you an example. And I know I'm jumping around a lot. I promise I'm going to lay it out for you in a much easier way to understand. Jumping around is just kind of the way that I teach.
If it makes you feel better, I've been chasing my 2.5-year-old around because she keeps ripping her diaper off.
Oh, geez. Fun.
She's currently crawling around playing bulldozer with her head on the carpet, just.
Aw. So if you had the Fehu rune, and the Fehu rune, we are going to go over its numerology. Numerology is a huge significant, plays a huge part. There's a huge significance of numerology within using runes for divination work. And remember, that is much different than their symbolism and representation of what they meant in ancient Norse linguistics. We are talking about the way that they were adopted and used for divination. Numerology plays a huge part in it. So the numerology that it represents is 1. The element that it represents is earth. The symbolism that it has is wealth. There's a lot more to it. It is not just wealth. We are going to go over that. But I just have that as a key word and a key phrase in there to help you memorize these. And then the incantation or galdra for it is listed there as well. And we are going to go over why the incantation and galdra matters. But to go back to what we were talking about before, let's take the runes cloth and let's say that we are going to go over the Fehu rune. So remember that the Fehu rune is the only thing that you are going to need to know right now for the explanation and example that I'm going to give you is that it symbolizes earth and wealth. So you are going to take earth and wealth, even though there's a lot more to it. This is our first example. You are going to take earth and wealth, and let's say that you threw that onto the cloth, and on the cloth you threw that into Muspelheim. And if you threw that into Muspelheim, then now that rune that you have thrown, the Fehu rune, symbolizes earth, wealth, the number 1, and fire. And so when you think about it, that gives you so much more information, which is one of the reasons that I love using the runes cloth, especially for beginners, is because that can give you a whole lot more information than the rune all by itself. Is in throwing it onto the cloth can give you a lot more information about what it is trying to tell you. So before I get more into that, we are actually going to specifically do a reading. I am going to show you exactly how it's done. We are going to discuss and talk about what each one of these runes means. We're probably only going to get to like 2 or 3 today, but anyway, I promise to go a little less all over the place. But first, we are going to watch a video that kind of leads into, nope, pause. That kind of leads into everything that I've been talking about so far. Let me know if me going all over the place is like really bothering you. I can totally try really hard to not do that as much. So we have the we are going to discuss and talk about Yggdrasil.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford.
Oh my
I'm
God,
an
no.
specialist teaching at the University of Colorado Boulder. Previously.
Okay, we are going to talk about Yggdrasil so that you understand and realize what I am talking about when I talk about the runes cloth. What do I even mean by Muspelheim and Venheim, and what am I talking about? So, we are going to watch a 3-minute video. It's really short. It's not going to be like the last one, but here, wait, no, pause. I have to share screens first. So this will hopefully help us segue into the next part of the class that I'm going to discuss and talk about, and hopefully not be so all over the place. So you guys can understand the runes cloth and why it has significance and what all of these words are that I am talking to you about, such as Muspelheim and Venheim, and where is, here we go. Okay. So this is Yggdrasil, the tree of life, and this is why the runes cloth is significant, why we use it in our divination practice, and how it relates to Norse mythology and Norse tradition. Share. Come on, you can do it. Thank you.
Yggdrasil is the tree of the worlds in Norse mythology. This colossal tree is the most perfect tree that ever existed. Its roots are so profound that they reach the 3 most distant worlds. These are Jotunheim, Niflheim, and Helheim. Jotunheim, the frozen kingdom and land of the Jontar, also known as the Ice Giants, was ruled by the king of the Jontar, the giant Thrym. Niflheim, in turn, is a desolated and shadowy world where the ice and the freezing mist make everything even more sinister. This is where Nithog, the giant dragon, lives, who is constantly gnawing at the roots of Yggdrasil. Helheim is the kingdom of Hel, also known as Hela. This is the world of the dead in the Norse mythology. This world is inhabited by the spectra of souls of those who died without glory. Nithavalir, the land of the dwarves, is located above these 3 profound kingdoms. These beings were quite skillful and capable of impressive things, like Thor's hammer, for instance. Right above the kingdom of the dwarves is Midgard, the land of men and women. This kingdom was surrounded by walls, edified by the gods to protect men. There was also the world of Alfheim, the kingdom of the light elves, creatures of great beauty. Svartalheim also existed, the home of the evil elves, black like tar. Muspelheim is the world of the fire giants, where Surtur live, whose fate is to destroy the Bifrost Bridge, which connects Asgard to the remaining worlds. Vanaheim is the home of the Vanir, for being the land of the gods of fertility, grains, and fruits spring up from the soul in vast amounts. This is the homeland of the goddess Freyr and Freya, offspring of Njord, the Vanir god of the seas. Lastly, in the greatest parts of Yggdrasil is Asgard, the kingdom of the gods Aesir. where Odin ruled sovereignty on his throne. This is also the location of Valhalla, the place where the great warriors who had an honored dead in the battlefield will go to. A giant eagle named Vidrifnir lived on the top of the worlds. The eagle is the arch enemy of the dragon Nithog, and the hate between both creatures was fed by the squirrel Ratatoskr, which ran up and down the world, carrying the insults of both. The squirrel's greatest source of amusement was to amplify the insults it carried even more, and witness the angered reactions of the eagle and the dragon. The leaves and the fruits of the Yggdrasil tree had magical properties. Eating just one of its fruits healed any wound, and some said that its leaves could even retrieve a life already lost. Yggdrasil will always remain beautiful and green, but it will tremble with Ragnarok's arrival.
Okay, so super short video. Once again, as I'm sure all of you know, don't pay attention. The pictures that they used are, I don't know what to call it, not realistic. They're not necessarily the way that Norse mythology depicted these magical creatures from across the different worlds. They are just there to make the video more interesting. But Yggdrasil, the world tree, is what the runes cloth is based off of. And hang on, I wanted to go back to the website. Here we go. So this is what the runes cloth is based off of. You have the different worlds of the world tree, and also the different worlds that humans, gods, giants, elves, dwarves, that they all live and reside in. And that is the significance of the runes cloth and how it relates to Norse mythology, is that it is a depiction of the different worlds that exist on Yggdrasil, and that also just the different dimensions and worlds that exist all around us, and the different worlds that different species and creatures all reside in. As the dude said, that I have now forgot his name, even though he says his name so many times in every video. But the guy that we listened to, who was a doctor, who has a PhD in Norse mythology, and how he discussed that the giants aren't necessarily a different species. They're just a different family. And that goes for a lot of the different creatures that exist in the family tree of the gods and goddesses that exist. It is just a different family and not necessarily a different species. But so we have on the runes cloth the depiction of earth, air, fire, and water, the depiction of each world, and what it represents. So the rune is you. The rune that you drew out of the bag of runes, out of the box of runes, depending on how you practice. The rune that you draw is you. It is what you are. It is a depiction of you based on the question and guidance that you are asking of the runes. Whether you asked a question that is very specific or you just asked for guidance, the rune is a representation of you within that situation. The world that it falls into, once you shake them and throw them onto the runes cloth, the world that it falls into is your situation, what you are going through, the world around you. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions so far?
No, ma'am. No questions so far.
Cool.
No, thank you.
Awesome. So you will draw your rune, you will shake them and throw them onto the runes cloth. As I said, I'm going to teach you many different ways to read runes. This is just one of them. And not all of them even involve this cloth at all. But anyway, so you will shake the rune, throw it onto the cloth. The rune is you, the world is your situation. And through reading each one of the runes that fall into the different worlds, you will get some sort of answer and some sort of guidance. Yeah. So we are going to learn about our very first rune. To do that, we already discussed and talked a little bit about the Fehu rune. So we are going to stick with the Fehu rune. So this is the Fehu rune. If you brought a pen and paper and are able to take notes, I would say taking notes is a good idea. We are going to start with its numerology. So much like the element, the meaning and symbology of the elements that I just read to you, as I said, they stem from Middle Eastern spirituality, and these spiritualities were discussed and talked about via trade routes and people coming over to the different countries and trading with each other and telling stories and talking to one another. And that's why the symbolism of the element is based off of Middle Eastern spirituality. They also, in Norse mythology, have a lot of symbolism based on elements, a lot. And when you discuss and talk about runes themselves, when you talk about the fact that Fehu represents Earth, it is based a lot in the alphabet. When you're just talking about the linguistics of runes, it is based on Scandinavian interpretation of what Earth would symbolize. When you use it for divination practices, which I said is only about 400 years old, we are using Middle Eastern interpretations of these elements because that is how it's used in divination work. So I already talked to you about what Earth symbolizes, and we already went over what Earth is. So the Fehu rune is a depiction of what I already read to you with Earth. Now we are going to go into its numerology and what the number 1 means in numerology to help us decipher what the Fehu rune symbolizes when you are using it for divination purposes. So it symbolizes Earth. A great way to kind of memorize that without having to memorize the gigantic spiel that I gave you about what Earth symbolizes is remembering that it symbolizes anything that exists in the physical plane of existence on Earth. So it, can symbolize your house, your car, plants, trees, you, anything that exists on the physical plane. Remember that all of the other elements are very theoretical. They are not focused on things that exist on Earth. Even though fire exists on Earth and air exists on Earth and water exists on Earth, their spiritual depiction and symbology is based on theoretical terms, such as fire being action. Action isn't necessarily something that you can touch or feel. It doesn't exist necessarily as something that is on the physical plane. It is a theoretical idea. Same with emotion and same with intellectual thought. These things are all things that you are not able to touch. So Earth is anything that you can touch that exists on the planet in a very physical form.
It's witnessable,
yeah.
but it's not textile.
Hey, that's a cool way of describing it. I like that. So yeah. Now we are going to go into the numerology. So remember that Fehu symbolizes Earth, and it also symbolizes the number 1. So you can go into the numerology section. Numerology, the numerology based, the numerology within runes work for divination, once again, is Arabic. For those of you who don't know, the numbers that we use every day are Arabic numerals, and their symbology is also Arabic. When it comes to spiritual practice, their symbology. We are talking about spiritual work and using it for divination, not using it for math or linguistics, even though math is also very spiritual. But the number 1 The number one is the beginning of everything. It is the creation and manifestation of an idea, a feeling, an action, a reaction, or a physical journey. When, oh crap. I didn't realize that. Why didn't anybody tell me that? Anyway, when I say when it's balanced and upright, that is because I wrote this for my tarot class. I did not realize that I forgot to edit out those specific parts. So tarot uses numerology that is Arabic as well. It is all Arabic numerology. Most numerology that you are going to discover throughout many cultures stemmed in the Middle East. And so I use the same numerology symbology or numerology symbolism for my tarot class. That's why it says when it's upright. Don't worry about that for runes work. Runes work does involve the rune being right side up and upside down, but not in this way. So disregard that. But it is independence, it is self-sufficiency, it is self-determination, it is the beginning of something positive or negative. It is balance. It is being able to seek independence and completion, starting a new journey and path. It is starting new ideas, making new choices, making new actions. It is change. It is the ability to gain a deeper understanding of yourself by starting something new. Because whenever we start something new, we always gain a deeper understanding about ourselves and others. And it is starting a new path that is either meant for you or it's not, and you are about to find out. So the number one is the beginning of a journey. It is the beginning of a journey that in manifestation of an idea, a feeling, an action, a reaction, or a physical journey. That is the number one. And so when you pair that with earth, you start to get a greater understanding of the symbolism behind the Fehu rune. So if we were to pair that with earth, I'm going to actually ask you guys. So if you were to pair so we're starting on the Fehu rune. If the Fehu rune represents the number one and it represents earth, how would you describe and what would be your definition if you were to put together the symbolism behind number one and the symbolism behind earth? What would be your definition?
I guess mine would be a physical, like starting on a physical, I don't want to say journey because journey would be action, but like starting a new hobby, like you're going to create something physically new.
Yes.
Like
totally.
you're gonna start making pottery or something.
Yes. Awesome. I love that. Yes. Does anybody else have any ideas of what the symbolism of one and earth put together would be?
Or you're gonna receive a new gift.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah.
It could be a start of a new business or a new entrepreneurial venture.
Yes. Yes, totally. Do you have any anything to add, EJ? Okay, so the next thing that we are going to go over about the Fehu rune is, if you remember, it also said there that it symbolizes wealth. Now, wealth can be broken down when we hear the word wealth, a lot of people go straight to money. And that is just not the case. Wealth and prosperity can mean tons and tons and tons and tons of different things. Especially when we are talking about, like, when you remember that the definition of wealth attached to the Fehu rune for divination purposes is hundreds of years old, you know, it was money was even seen differently. So what do you think wealth and prosperity could symbolize if we kind of throw out the idea of it symbolizing lots of money? Does anybody have any ideas?
No, I'm drawing a complete blank. I'm
That's okay.
I'm coming up empty.
So wealth and prosperity can also relate to having an incredible support system around you, meaning, you know, lots of friends, lots of family, lots of people there to support and love you. It can also mean having a lot of the things that you need, which doesn't necessarily mean having a lot of money. Can mean having shelter, having access to food and water and education, and having access to all the things that you feel that you need. Also, in relating this to Norse mythology, it can definitely also mean doing very well in battle. Which can translate, you know, in modern times, or even to, you know, to us, doing very well in battle can also just mean that you feel as though you are somebody who fights for what you believe in, feeling like you have the accessibility, the ability to fight for what you believe in, feeling like you have health. So feeling like you are a healthy, strong individual. Prosperity can also mean feeling like you have been very successful, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean money. It can mean that you feel like you have reached a point where you're accomplishing your goals, and your goals don't have to have anything to do with money. And feeling like you have come to a point where you feel satisfaction about yourself, about your life, about who you are, that you feel wealthy in a sense that you feel like you are doing exactly what you should be in life, and it is leading you to have a very well off life. Even if you don't have very much money, it can feel like you've created a wonderful support system, a wonderful home, a wonderful little nest for yourself and for the people that you love and for your children and your family, feeling like you are a successful, wealthy person, even if you are not wealthy, even if you don't have wealth as far as money goes. You can feel like you have absolutely everything that you need and more, and feeling like you are supported and loved and have access to all of the things that you feel as though you need access to, such as food and water and shelter and education and love. So if you take all of those things together, you get the Fehu rune. You take the number 1, which we just discussed and went over what the definition and meaning of the number 1 is. You take the element earth, which we have gone over and discussed what that is. And then you take wealth, exactly what we just talked about and what I kind of gave a description to. And that is everything that within divination work that the Fehu rune represents. And now we are going to talk about its incantation, or Galdra, which is fee, 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 foo, 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 fehu, fehu, fehu. And the reason that the Galdra or incantation is important is because runes for divination purposes can be used for a lot more than just telling the future or talking and giving you guidance or answering questions. It can also be used as a form of sigil work or even a form of casting. And people discuss casting runes, and that is what the incantation is for. And when you cast a rune, it would be exactly what we discussed. You are trying to bring into your life the number one, as we discussed. You are trying to bring into your life the element earth, which we just discussed, and the symbolism of wealth, which we just discussed, and how vast of a meaning that can really be. And then also to help yourself cast this rune, you can draw it on things. One of my favorite ways to use it as a sigil is to draw it on a pot and then plant a plant into the pot to help grow the manifestation of the Fehu rune, to help bring it into existence by growing it inside of a plant. And then when you speak or talk to the plant and you cast onto the plant, using that incantation of the, I'm not sure, I have heard both ways pronounced. I have heard it pronounced fee, 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 or also fe, 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 fe. And since it is fehu, I always thought it was fe, but I've also heard it pronounced fee. So yeah, pronouncing it fe is what I've always been used to and how I've always done it, but I definitely heard that I could be wrong. So if you know and you're sure, please let me know. But yeah, so using the incantation or Galdra to cast, we got something in the chat. Aww. Yes, I agree. I don't know how, like, when you sent that into the 829. Oh, good, right now. Awesome. Okay, I caught it. But yeah, I agree, Erica, totally. I think I agree, which is one of the reasons that I like to plant it as a plant, as part of my casting of Fehu. So yes, to use it as a sigil or to cast it, the incantation or Galdra can be used in a form of casting. So like I said, drawing the Fehu symbol on a pot and growing a plant to help bring the manifestation of the number one and earth and wealth into your life, and all of that symbology that we just discussed and talked about. You can use it that way. You can put a sigil on absolutely anything. You can use the Fehu rune as a symbol, as a sigil on anything that you want. I will use it sometimes when I am journaling, because I am trying to manifest a lot of earth into my life and a lot of the, you know, starting of a new journey and starting of a new path, and feeling prosperous within that path, and trying to bring the essence and energy of the Fehu rune into my practice and into my life, and trying to bring the number one and the element earth. And using the Fehu rune is a great way to bring the one and the earth and the wealth and prosperity and all of that into your manifestation spells, into the magic that you practice, without having to separately bring the number one and earth and wealth and prosperity all in separate ways. Instead, you can just use the Fehu rune. And the incantation or Galdra will help you bring that energy into your craft and into your practice as well. So let's say that we take our Fehu rune and we throw our Fehu rune. Where is it? We throw our Fehu rune onto the rune's cloth, and it lands in Vanaheim. What do you think that means? How would the definition change? Remember that the rune is you, and the world is the situation that you are in.
you're going to experience new emotions.
Ooh, awesome. I love it.
Like a good example is experiencing motherhood for the first time.
Totally.
There was like I didn't I'm struggling to explain it because I don't want to, it's not some grand magical experience that I think everyone needs to experience, but it was an experience.
For sure. I'm sure.
Like, it's definitely not an experience that I think is for everyone, but if for me, it was such, I was really worried my entire pregnancy because I didn't have that attachment. I didn't recognize it as a baby. I recognized myself as an incubator for my husband's child. So
Totally.
I never made that attachment until she was born and in my arms, that it was like, oh, I get it.
Yes, I think that's such a wonderful example as well, because you have both earth and water. You have all of the emotions that comes with, plus the physical creation of an actual being. So yeah, totally.
Well, that example kind of makes mine a little less signifying, I guess. I was thinking more like a new venture of like fluidity. You know what I mean? Like almost like a breakthrough, less stressors, less things to really worry about or concern yourself with. Friendships are easier to work with, relationships, financial, you know what I mean? Like they just come to you without such a drawback. You know what I mean? Like with ease, I suppose. Like passive income, I guess, for instance, you know, or you're like your business finally taking off or something, and you can just finally sit back and relax and stop stressing over 16-hour days or whether or not you can afford to keep your lights on or something. You know what I mean?
No, I really like that. I really like that.
Me too. I love that example. Yes, definitely. And that would bring
I don't know how much I missed, but my daughter had complications of eating, and I came back and you're like, all of these things. And I was like, oh, well, we were somewhere, now we're here. So I'll wait for a second because my daughter started choking while she was eating stuff.
Oh no.
I'm so sorry. Is she okay?
Yeah, she's had complications since birth. She's born at 25 weeks, under 1.5 pounds. So she's definitely a trooper. She's got to keep a close eye on things when certain situations arise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my daughter was born on time, a couple days, like 2 weeks early, but she still constantly chokes. She's got a very narrow palate, just like her dad. So I get it.
All right. She's been off thickened liquids for almost a year now. So it's still in the back of your head, like.
Yeah. Wow. That would be a lot. Geez, having kids in general sounds like a lot. You guys are amazing. That's
Right. I like related super heavy with that first example. It's like Chloe was in an incubator for like 4 months. So like not only did like I become a father, she's also fighting for her life now, you know? So like it was a whole bunch of things I hadn't necessarily experienced prior.
yeah, definitely. And I bet that would be so overwhelming. And it's a really good example of being, you know, because the rune doesn't necessarily always symbolize something wonderful. I mean, it is, childbirth is wonderful, but also going through complications and the overwhelming feelings that come with that, you know, is also a great representation of the rune.
Right. Yeah, you made mention earlier about like the inversion, right side up, upside down.
Yep.
like as well as like the way it plays in with another rune and which order they're in when they coordinate with one another plays a huge difference in the way that they function as well.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. I love it. Totally. I think you guys gave such amazing examples and so deep and beautiful, and I love it so much. Yes. And that is a great representation of what happens when the rune falls into Vanaheim. So those are great. Let's say the Fehu rune. So as we know, it is the representation of, in numerology, the representation of one. It is also the symbolism of earth. And let's say that it fell into, let's pick one that's a little bit harder. What if it fell into Jotunheim? Air is always hard, at least for me. Air is always more difficult for me.
No.
Excuse me for asking, but what does air represent specifically in this? Like water is supposed to be like emotion, etc.
Okay, so that's probably where part of what you missed. So air is theoretical thought. It is the theoretical thought of mathematics, how math exists all around us, but yet it is, even if you don't comprehend it, even if you can't see it, it is still there. It is theoretical thought and wisdom and analytics and intellect.
I have one that comes to mind very quickly, and it's the Fibonacci sequence.
Yes, totally, exactly. I love that you brought that up. Yes.
I also love that you brought that up because I was just thinking about the Fibonacci sequence earlier today. I don't know why. I don't know what I was doing bin recs in the pharmacy. So I was going through and I was scanning all of the prescription bags. And I was like, huh, this kind of reminds me of the Fibonacci sequence. I don't know why, but it did.
That's wonderful. Yes, and that is such a great representation of earth and air working together, of the physical working with the theoretical and working with intellect and working with patterns and geometry and mathematics. And yeah, that is a great representation of earth mixed with air. Totally.
Right. My ideology, if you take out the whole earth aspect, kind of sways to more like conceptual engineering, like inventors, if that makes sense. A brand new idea that you can form into a physical construct. It's just however you actually get there, you know what I mean? But it's just the idea is coming and going kind of thing, or an idea for a brand new business or a name for an animal or something, you know what I mean? Or a different way to shift your own perception so you can live in a different paradigm and be happier, or something, you know what I mean? The what is it called? The law of attraction, I guess.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes. Definitely. I think that's a great way to blend earth and air as well, because earth is anything that exists in the physical realm. So earth is anything that exists physically, whereas air is very theoretical, something that exists in analytics and exists on a theoretical plane of existence. And so combining those two things, I mean, engineering is a great example, because it is taking what's theoretical, what exists in your mind, what only exists in a theoretical plane, and making it into something that exists physically in the real world. And so that's a great combination of earth and air.
Hypotheses.
Yes, definitely. Any science, like an experiment, performing an experiment in science that has not necessarily been done before, because if it has been done before, you're getting a little bit more into the earth realm because it already exists on the physical plane. But new discoveries would be a great one for the Fehu rune falling in to Jotunheim, because you have that number one, which is the very first and a brand new path, the number one. And then you also have air, which is the theoretical idea of a hypothesis and what you think is going to happen. And then you have the physical application of it in the experiment. Wow. I said air was going to be hard, and you guys were like, nah. That's wonderful. That's awesome.
You can't bamboozle us.
Right? Because for me, air was always really difficult at first. It's probably number one, I did learn about paganism and witchcraft at like 3 years old. And
Okay, well, what's
theoretical
that?
things are much harder to conceptualize, especially when you're younger, because it doesn't exist. Especially for me, theoretical math took a long time. I know all math is theoretical, but you know, the ability to take one bean and add it to another bean and know that it means two beans is much less theoretical than like linear algebra. And learning how like real theoretical math actually ties into the universe that we exist in has always been very hard for me to conceptualize theoretical mathematics and theoretical geometry, shapes that don't necessarily exist in the third dimension, and trying to conceptualize what a fourth dimension would be, and just theoretics when you get really high into physics and quantum physics and stuff has always been very challenging for me to conceptualize. And air, once you get really high up into spiritual teachings of what air symbolizes, it is all of those things, the things that we are unable to see on the physical plane, the things that have to stay in the theoretical realm for now, until science catches up. So yeah, awesome. Okay, let's move on to the next room then. Wonderful. You guys seem to have Fehu down pretty well, and where or what it would symbolize when it falls into the different realms of Yodin, of Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil. Need to get better with pronunciation.
Yggdrasil.
Yggdrasil. Thank you very much. Yggdrasil. Where was I? Oh, the top one, Alex. Okay, so the next rune that we have on here is, once again, Uruz.
No, you had it correct the first time. Uruz.
Uruz. Thank you. Is number 2. So it falls into numerology. It would be number 2. So we are going to go look at numerology, and remember that we are looking at Arabic numerology. And as described and explained before, a lot of Arabic numerology made its way into Europe. And when runes started to be used for divination purposes, a lot of Arabic numerology was used for the interpretation of runes, even though Norse mythology does have its own set of numerology, but Arabic numerals were added to divination practice once runes made it through the rest of Europe, and the idea of runes made it to India, to East Asia, to the Middle East, because runes are something, even just in linguistics, even just the alphabet is something that is pretty well known throughout the world. We don't know much about them. We don't know much about necessarily what they were used for in ancient times when we are talking about thousands of years ago. But the idea of linguistics and the Norse alphabet have made its way across the world through trade routes and through storytelling and through many different ways. And the numbers that you use for divination practice for runes reading are Arabic numerals, and therefore Arabic numerology. And so we go to the numerology section and we look at the number 2. So the number 2 represents, okay, no problem. See you soon. So the number 2 represents a decision. So as you will notice, every single number flows into the next. So first you have your new path, your new idea, your brand new journey that you are embarking on, whether that be a new journey of, as we talked about, a manifestation of an idea of feeling, action, reaction, a physical, actual, literal journey, whatever it may be that you are embarking on and trying to manifest into your life. Number 2 is a decision that you have come to. So once you start your journey, whether it be a theoretical journey or a physical journey, you will reach a crossroads. And this is what number 2 represents in numerology. It is the decision that you have to make. And it is your ideas coming together to create a fork in the road. This is the representation of the decision that you must make. It is the symbol of polarity, the either or situations in life, and the determining point in your journey. This choice can manifest itself in your physical life, thoughts, actions, or emotions. And so, yeah, it is the decision that you have to make. It is the fork in the road that you have come to. It is the determining point in your journey, and this decision will impact the entire journey that you are attempting to manifest. And it is this decision is going to impact your physical life, your thoughts, your actions, your emotions. And you are either going to make this decision using logical thought and grounded reasoning. You are going to critically evaluate your decision, or you are going to make it on an impulse, depending on where the rune falls and what runes are next to it. You are going to, sometimes we use reasoning, sometimes we use logic, sometimes we use critical thinking, sometimes we just jump and think later. So depending on where the runes fall in your reading and what is next to it and what world your rune falls into is going to decide how you are going to make this decision and this very important choice, and whether or not it is going to have a positive outcome or not. So that is down here. So that is the Uruz rune. It is number 2, and it symbolizes number 2. Its element is water. And as we discussed before, water is your emotional state of being. It is your emotions, how you react to actions. It is the emotions that are, emotions don't necessarily have to have a reason. You don't always have a reason for being sad. You don't always have a reason for being angry or for being happy or anything at all. And water is the transformation and the flow of those emotions that flow in and out of you, sometimes without any reason at all. The water represents the emotional connections that we have to each other, the relationships, the emotional relationships that we have with each other, the emotions that our friendships bring, the emotions that our romantic relationships bring, the emotions that flow through you for many, many, many different reasons, and that give you a connection to all other beings that feel emotions. And the more that science figures out about emotions in general and about how neurons function and how the brain works, we are realizing that more things feel more emotions than we realize. And we are doing a lot of studies on the emotions of plants and the emotions of animals and the emotions of trees and the emotions of mushrooms, which is pretty cool. And anyway, so water represents all kinds of different emotions that flow through you, and how those emotions connect you to other people and other beings and other things, sentient things that exist on the planet Earth. The symbolism behind it is healing and transformation, and we are going to discuss how those are just key words and how the Uruz rune means so much more than just healing and transformation, and what healing and transformation really mean, because those both have very vast definitions, and also there's a lot more to it. Those are just keywords to help you memorize the rune. So if now that you know that the Uruz rune represents the number 2, we went over what the number 2 means, we went over what water represents. what do you think would be your definition for the Uruz rune when it comes to divination readings? Just knowing its numerology and its element.
So when you say like healing and transformation, that always brings about like death and rebirth for me. So maybe this is a choice that we're being given, where we have to give up part of a life that isn't working for us and sever that bond or change that relationship or whatever, and kind of rise from the ashes and discover a new perspective or strength.
Definitely. I love that. Yes, totally. So yeah, making a decision about emotion. So to me, I'm leaving out right now because we're going to discuss the symbolism and the incantation and Galdra. So right now I'm just going off of the numerology and the element. But making a decision about water has always made me think about our personal relationships, and trying to make a decision about the emotional energy that you want to allow into your life, and the emotional energy that you want to put out to others, and trying to make a decision about the emotions that you personally want to expel into the world, how you want to treat other people, the emotions that you want to give other people, the emotions that you want to allow other people and other things to give you. So whenever I think about the number 2 in water, I always question and think about what I am allowing to get to me. You know, what is it really that big of a deal that my boss is mad at me? Do their emotions really have to affect my entire next 2 weeks of my life? Does it really have to affect me that much that, you know, that my mother said something mean to me? Do I really have to let all of the emotions of other people affect me in the way that they do? And how can I change my emotions to be more fluid? And how can I allow myself to feel emotions that are my own, rather than letting everybody else's emotions change and transform mine? And then on the other side too, I always think about empathy as well, and trying to balance out empathy with everything else I just said.
Right. I've also learned that Uruz also means like transforming what you're receiving as well. So like on that exact same note, like with your boss, a colleague, family member, friend, whatever, you know, they're coming down on you hard, or like they're not really like believing and supporting in you and stuff. You can transform that hate, or a word less aggressively, into inspiration, drive, you know, a stronger commitment to do that exact same thing, you know what I mean, that like they said you couldn't do, you know.
Yes, definitely. I love that. And that really, really definitely symbolizes the 2 and water, and trying to make that decision for yourself, and trying to step out of letting every single emotion that other people have towards you always affect you in such a negative way. It doesn't have to. Of course, there are times where, you know, we can't help it. The things that other people say and do affect us negatively, and there's nothing, it's really, really hard to change your own brain chemistry. Things are going to make you release cortisol, whether you like it or not. And things are going to make you release serotonin, whether you like it or not. But there are decisions that we can make about how we let these things affect us, and what we do with the emotions that we are given. and how transformative we allow ourselves to be, how fluid we allow ourselves to be, how oh my gosh, I had the word on the tip of my tongue. It was another word for transformation, but how we allow ourselves to express emotion as well, and thinking about how our emotions affect others, knowing how much other people's emotions affect us, trying to also be aware of how our emotions affect others. I work with kids. I am a behavioral therapist for kids, and I always really have to be aware that working with kids is a whole new journey. It has been a whole fun, exciting, really hard journey that I have entered. And a lot of people think that you just should always be happy around children 100% of the time. And I have had to learn that being inauthentically happy 100% of the time is not helpful to children. And trying to work on that myself, trying to work on showing real emotion. And I think that the Uruz rune too really reminds us about like authenticity of emotion. And so now I want to dive into that healing and transformation aspect of it. So just like I did with the Fehu rune, I'm going to ask you guys, what does healing and transformation mean to you? And not necessarily in its literal terms. Like, you know, obviously healing can mean literally feeling better after being sick. But what else does healing and transformation mean to you?
Finally forgiving somebody else or yourself and coming to terms with the past.
Yes, I love that. Definitely.
Well, for me, healing, it can be very painful because it's a reckoning of all the emotions regarding that and feeling them completely and letting them flow with validity and respect and giving them the honor that they deserve. So yeah, it's uncomfortable for me, but if you kind of let it go, just like in water, if you're like fighting the current, it's going to be really, really painful and take a lot of effort. But if you just kind of let go and flow with it, then it's a lot easier. Although it still may not be not painful.
Yes, definitely. And looking at the runes and how they're depicted in the reading, and knowing that healing and transformation can both be exciting, beautiful, amazing, and it can feel wonderful, and it can also be extremely painful. And I think that was a wonderful thing to bring up as well. Definitely. Especially transformation. When we think about transformation, water, especially the Uruz rune, also reminds us too of the cycles and phases of life that we go through as human beings. That transformation from one phase of life to the other is usually painful for humans. I know a lot of people that have just kind of come to terms with it, and they're very peacefully and gracefully aging. I'm not one of those people. I like to fight it with everything, and feeling like you're getting old, feeling like you are entering another stage of life. I am definitely at one of those crossroads where I have to like accept that I'm turning 30 soon. And it's hard. I'm angry about it. And I think that sometimes accepting transformation can be really difficult. Healing and transformation like I said, can also be very literal. Because it's water, you want to try really hard to not necessarily relate it to the healing physically of the body. So like being very, very ill and healing, even though it does have a lot of that significance in it, because of the strong water element that is tied to the Uruz rune, you definitely want to think more on the scale of emotional healing, healing from grief, healing from depression, healing from very emotional journeys that we are on in life. And then when the number 2 is added, knowing that there are a lot of decisions that have to be made during the healing process. And that emotional healing can be just as, it can have just as much effect on the human body as physical healing. And transformation can mean so many different things. It can have a lot to do with emotional transformation, feeling like you're not the same person anymore emotionally and physically as you were 5 years ago, even last year. I feel like very recently we went like globally, we all transformed a lot. We all went through a lot of transformation in the last 2 years. And there's going to be a lot of healing that we all have to do. I know that like I gained 17 new fears from 2020 to now. And so there's a lot of healing that's going to happen. I am much more of an anxious human being, especially about like leaving the house, than I was in 2019. So yes, healing and transformation. If you are taking notes and you want homework for this class, I never enforce homework, but definitely I suggest homework. And taking the Uruz rune and the Fehu rune and deciding for yourself what wealth means, and remembering to kind of look further than money when it's wealth, and look further than not being sick when it comes to healing. And kind of journal and write about what healing and transformation means to you and what wealth means to you. The next thing we are going to talk about is the incantation and Guldra. As I said before with the Fehu rune, the incantation and Guldra is used when casting the rune. This isn't necessarily for when you are giving someone else a reading. It is for bringing and casting it in your own life and using it as a sigil or using it as a tool for casting. And so using it as a tool for casting can mean bringing it into your own spiritual practice, and whatever craft that you perform, whatever spiritual practice that is something that you perform as part of your pagan spirituality, you can bring the Uruz rune into it if you are trying to bring in the symbolism behind the number 2 and the symbolism behind water and the symbolism behind healing and transformation. You can bring that into your craft using this symbol as a sigil, as well as using this incantation or Guldra, and chant and say that chant over and over and over again during your practice and during your spell work, during your ancestral work, during all of these things. You can bring that chant into it. And also when you use it as a sigil, as I said before, I really like to put this sigil on a pot and then plant a plant in it, because it makes me feel like I am manifesting the energy behind the Uruz rune. And so drawing it as a sigil, and then whenever you talk to your plant or chant with your plant, saying that incantation and saying that Guldra and repeating it over and over again to help bring that energy into your practice and into your sigil and into your casting. And also knowing that this same Guldra has been used for, we don't even know for how long, but for at least a few hundred years as an incantation. And then of course for a couple thousand years as linguistics. And so knowing that it has so much energy tied to it, that it's been used for so long, and that the same words have been said by so many people trying to manifest this same energy into their lives, it has so much more energy and power to it. And if you don't know what to use as a chant during your ritual work or your spell work, using this incantation or galdra can be very handy if you are trying to bring healing and transformation and water and the number 2 into your life, or even just trying to contemplate it and think about what it means, and think about the crossroads that you're at, and seeking guidance or just seeking meditation and seeking thought. This can be a great incantation to use if you're not sure what you would like to use. It is a beautiful open practice, galdra, that can be used for this type of spiritual healing and transformation. So it is past 9. So did anybody have any questions about anything that we went over today? Did you enjoy class?
Yeah, thanks for letting me pop on a little late and get some knowledge out of it. I was totally taking notes, so thank you.
Of course. I'm so happy you're here.
Happy to be here.
All right, definitely appreciate your time. I look forward to the next one.
Yay, good. I'm so glad. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. I always love teaching runes classes. I love learning about runes, and I am so happy that we could create such a wonderful class about this. You guys all gave such amazing examples and ideas, and I always love how much my students teach me and how much you guys bring to this class. So thank you, and I can't wait to see you next week.
See you later. Thanks, Alex.
Of course. Have a great night.